Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, BERNINA Embroidery Software 8, the third dimension. You can submit questions by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. Our presenter is Debbie Lashbrook. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome everyone. Spring is a time of bright colors that paint our landscape. This banner is to celebrate spring and is designed to help you learn about some of the choices for creating embroidery with dimensions. The flower petals that you see here have 3 StumpWork petals, which is embroidery over a wire edge. 2 are done with cotton fabric, and 1 is done with the sheer fabric. The other 2 petals are cut with the CutWork tool and are tucked and tacked on the fabric background. The leaf is made with the PunchWork tool and involves punching through fibers placed on a fabric background and then placing it on the background fabric of the banner and stitching it with the machine. In this slide is a list of topics for today's webinar. We will be focusing on the features of Software 8 that can be used to create 3-dimensional elements. Also, you'll learn about starts and stops and digitizing to avoid jump stitches. The banner is also bound using the 8mm lap seam foot. So at the end, I have slides that show you how to do this. So here is the software lesson. So you will open your software and right-click on the hoop icon. And this project was designed to be done in the jumbo hoop. But if you cannot use the jumbo hoop, you can certainly make all the dimensions smaller and then complete the project on your machine. You'll want to select the 43 foot, which is the couching foot, and then click OK. Go over to one more thing I wanted you to do here is also do manual centering, and that lets us take the flower center that we create and put it at the top of the hoop. Now you can click OK and then go to the artwork canvas side of the software. Once here, you're going to select the visible vector shape tool and select the spiral. I had 5 revolutions, and to create the spiral, just click and drag on screen. You can select the pick tool to find out what the dimensions are. Now we're going to click on reshape, and I'm going to reshape some of these to make it so the rows are a little bit further apart. So I'm just clicking and dragging on all these reshape points to make sure that the rows are spread out. Here toward the center, you can always select some points and delete those points, again, to create a little bit more distance there so that the machine has plenty of room to couch the yarn. When you're finished, select and then click on Convert Artwork to Embroidery. And this will create a single line object. Now down in the stitch toolbar in the effects area, you can click on couching, and this is now a couch design that will be stitched with a single line of stitching. I'm going to change the color of that and then copy and paste, and I'll change the color of the copy as well. With this copy selected, if I deactivate the couching, it now becomes another stitch on top of the couch spiral. And if I want to do a pattern stitch on top of the couch spiral, I can right-click on the pattern run outline and it will open up object properties. I'm going to click on select, and then the pattern that I used was in the Bernina V5 folder, and it was stitch number 22. I'll click OK, and then I played with the size and spacing and determined that I wanted to use 0.25 for this, and then you can click OK, and you can see that there's decoration now around the yarn. I'm going to select both of these objects and right click and group them, and then move them to the top of my hoop. And this is why we activated manual centering. Next, we're going to bring a picture of a stem into the software. So I'm going to click on Insert Artwork, and you do have this PNG file that you can use to create the stem. I'll click on Open, and then I'm going to move the stem and place it so that it's roughly in the middle of the hoop. And I'll bring down the flower center so it touches the top of the stem. Now, when we want to dictate to the software how starts and stops are going to be digitized, we can go into our options and go to the General tab and uncheck Apply Closest Join while digitizing. And in this way, the method that we use to digitize will dictate to the software how to start and stop. And that's what I want to do when I digitize this stem. I'm going to click OK, and then select my color for the stem, the Open Object tool, and I'm going to use a single outline. So when I look at this to determine the path that I want to create in doing this stem, I'm going to start here at the base and digitize up to the tip and then back down. Then I'll digitize down to the next offshoot, digitize up and back down, and then to the third offshoot, digitize up and back down. Then I'll digitize down to the bottom, all the way back up at the top, and then I'll cover it with another stitch. So I've planned the path, and in this way, this is why I wanted to be in control of my starts and stops, and that's why Closest Join was deactivated. Now we're going to use a tool that we don't use very much, and that's called Double Run. But I'm first going to digitize with my single run up to the tip of this stem. I'm going to do left click to start, and then a right click to make a curve, and then a left click and press enter. I press escape to deselect the tool, select the stitch that I just digitized, go to the edit toolbar and click on double run. So what this does is it puts a stitch right on top of the one that I just did and follows that same path. I'm going to activate a back stitch. So the top stitch will be a back stitch. Now I'll go back to the digitize toolbox, select the open object tool, my single outline, and I'm going to digitize from the base of this down to the next offshoot. Again, left clicks at the beginning and end, a right click to curve, and I'll press enter, and then go back up this next stem. I'm going to put more right clicks in here because I want a more drastic curve, and I'll end with a left click, press enter, press escape, select the stitch I just digitized, go to edit, double run, and change that to a back stitch. So that puts me back down here. I'll go to the digitize toolbox, the open object tool. I have a single line, and I'll digitize down to the next offshoot and press enter, and then go up the stem and press enter. Press escape, select, go to the edit toolbox, activate double run, and change it to a back stitch. Now I'll go back to the digitized toolbox, the open object. I have a single line of stitching, and I'm going to digitize down to the end of the stem. Again, ending with a left click, pressing enter, press escape, and I'll reselect that open object tool and go back up the stem. Now, it's important that you try to get your clicks kind of at the same point here, but if you need to reshape, you can always reshape. I'll come back up to the base and press enter, press escape, select that line I just did, go to the edit toolbox, activate double run, and change that top layer to a back stitch. Now, to see kind of how this works, I can activate my reshape tool, pardon me, and now you can see all the turquoise circles or the blue circles are my right clicks. The yellow square would be left clicks. This is the start point. This is the stop point. And now I'll press escape. The next thing I'm going to do are fringe flowers. And for this, I'm going to change to the metric system because I'm going to activate the ruler. I'll go to the digitized toolbox and click on open object. And I'm going to select my color for the bottom part of this fringe flower and make 2 left clicks across the end of the stem and press enter. Next, I'll activate the measurement tool and I'll measure from one end to the other. And I want this first line to be between 15 and 20 millimeters long. I'll press escape, and you have to press escape twice. Sorry about that. I'm going to right click on the line and drag to make a quick clone. And that will make a copy of the line that I just created. I'll double click on the line and change the outline type to a satin stitch. And I want to do manual spacing. I want to pack more fibers into here, so I'm going to do 0.3. And I want to change the width to 12 millimeters. So it's going to be a very wide satin stitch. And then I will click OK. And while it is selected, I want to remove the underlay because I don't want any of the stitching under this, because when we cut the fringe, you would see those stitches. I'm going to move this so it's just over that line of stitching. And now I'm going to digitize with the closed object tool, and I'll do a cup shape. I'm going to left click and then right click, left click. Remember the backspace key if you make a mistake, and then right click, left click, and then press enter. I'll select this and I'm going to change it into a satin fill. Now, so we can check our starts and stops, I'm going to go to color film and click on show objects, and find the first yellow line, and I'll activate reshape. So it's starting here and stopping here. When I press the tab key, it will go to the next object, and I want it to start where it ended and then stop here. Then I'll press the tab key one more time, and here I want this satin stitch to start here and stop here. I also want to make sure that the angle is perpendicular to my starts and stops. Then I will press escape. I can also reshape if I need to, and I'll move this start point a little bit. The idea of this cup shape is that you have to have one end of the fringe being held. So that is what is going to hold that. I'll press escape, select my next color, go back to the open object tool, the single line, and I'll digitize another line at the end of the fringe with 2 left clicks and an enter. Press escape, right click and drag to make a quick clone. Open object properties, change that line into a satin stitch. I'm also going to do manual spacing for this. And for this one, I'm going to do 20 millimeters wide and click OK. I'll again want to eliminate the underlay and then select this and bring it back and place it so it's just over the edge of that single line. In color film, I'll select that first line, copy and paste, and change it to a satin outline. I'm going to right click because I want to make this a little bit less wide, so 2.5 millimeters, and click apply. And then you'll want to make sure, zoom in and move it so that it doesn't cover up any of the yellow fringe. Now I want to check my starts and stops with this fringe flower as well. So I'm going to first of all select the very single line, the very first one, and click on reshape. It starts and it stops. I'll press the tab key and I want it to start where it left off and stop on the opposite side. Press the tab key again and I want it to start and stop. So our starts and stops are placed correctly here. I'll press escape. I want to collapse my show objects. I want to select the yellow fringe flower, right click and group. Select the orange fringe flower, right click and group. Now I'll select both of these objects and copy and paste, and I'll move that copy down and place it over the offshoot. And then I'll paste again and move this copy over to the left. And if I click inside the dark boxes, I can rotate this and then move it in place. Now I want to right click on the hoop icon, and I want to go back to automatic centering and click OK. And now I can see that my design fits within the hoop. And I can hide the bitmap if I wish. I'm done with that now. So now we're ready to add Puffy Foam lettering. So I'll right click on the lettering icon and type in the words welcome, and then I'll press enter and type in spring. And the alphabet that I used is called 3D Comica. Remember to look up in the reference manual the minimum and maximums. That's help reference manual. Go to the appendices and glossary, go to embroidery fonts, and you'll find the minimums and maximums listed for all the embroidery fonts. So with this 3D Comica, the range is from 0.8 to 2 inches, and I'm going to make mine 1 inch. So I'm going to type in the number 1 and put the inch symbol in, and then click OK and click on the screen. You can change the color of that to any type of color that you want. Now we're going to add the petals around the flower center. So I'm going to go to the closed object tool, and I'm just going to use a single outline. I can select the color that I want, and this will be a left click, a right click, and a left click along the flower center. And then I'm just going to do a series of right clicks to create the petal. When I get close to closing the shape, I'll press enter and then enter again. I'll press escape, select this, and I'm going to change this into a ripple fill. And then I can double click on that ripple fill and change the spacing as well. So I'm going to change this to a 4 and apply that. With the ripple fill selected, I'll go to the mirror merge layout and select wreath. And I want to change the number of copies to 5. And then I'll bring them in and set them around the flower center. It doesn't, if you get this message, do you want to merge overlapped objects? Say no, and that way you can treat each petal independently. And you could actually move them around if you want. Remember, it's okay that they overlap because these are going to be 3-dimensional. And it's okay that it covers the flower because you can move this petal and bend it so that it's out of the way of what is underneath. Now, 3 of these petals we're going to make into StumpWork petals. So this is the embroidery over wire. 2 of the petals I'm going to use to make into a CutWork file. And one of the StumpWork petals is actually going to be made to use with sheer fabric. And so I'm going to eliminate the ripple stitching from that. So when I'm creating these StumpWork petals, I have to do each petal one at a time, because if I try to do them all at once, this software will not let me. So I'm going to select the first petal, and I'll go to the CutWork dialog box and click on Add CutWork Border. I will choose for border type, StumpWork or piece, and I'm going to leave this at an offset of 1 and click OK. Now, when I do this, there's a flag attached to my mouse that's saying to click and cut the wire line. I want the wire completely enclosed in the cover stitch, so I'm going to press escape, and that will take me out of that flag. So I'll repeat that same process for another petal. I'll select the petal, go to Add CutWork Border. I've got StumpWork, I've got the offset. I'm going to click OK, and then I'll press Escape. So one of the petals I want to make for sheer fabric. So for this, I'll do the same process of adding the CutWork border. But after I'm finished, I'm going to deselect and then select the ripple and delete the ripple. So this will be, instead of a cotton fabric that has stitching on it, it will be a sheer fabric. These last 2 petals I'm going to change into CutWork. I'll do this with the same process. I'm going to select the petal. I'll go to Add CutWork Border. But this time, instead of StumpWork, I'm going to select Cut. And I want to change the whole border type to Cut. I'm going to actually do these a little bit bigger, so I'm going to do an offset of 2 and click OK. And I'll repeat that process for this one as well. I want to change that to a cut and click OK. Now for these petals, I'm not going to use the ripple fill. They're just going to be a plain petal that is cut out of fabric. Remember, when you're in artistic view, in order to see those cut lines, you have to have show outlines activated, because if I deactivate it, the petals go away. So make sure you have that activated. Now, if you are in design view, you definitely see all the CutWork lines. I'm going to switch back to artistic view. Now we're ready for the PunchWork leaf. And this is done through the digitized toolbox. I'll go to PunchWork and I'm going to select my color that I want. And this will be digitized with a left click, a right click, a left click, a right click, and an enter. I can press escape and double click on the leaf to open up object properties. And if I want it to punch more, I'm going to increase the density. And I'm also going to use a border stitching. I'm going to leave this at blanket, but I'm going to change the spacing to 3. And I'll click OK on that. So at this point, we'll do File, Save As, and we'll call this Combined Design. Now we will not be using this file to stitch out because we've got several components that have to actually be stitched out separately from the base design. So that's what we're going to do next. The first thing we're going to do is select the ripple stitching. And here I'm actually going to switch to artistic or to design view so you can tell what's selected. I'll hold down the Control key and select the CutWork border, the StumpWork border that is around this ripple. I'll go to the StumpWork toolbox and select Create StumpWork Subdesign, and then click on Open StumpWork Subdesign. Now you need to go through this process because this cutout leaf can't be done on the background fabric or the base design. It has to be elevated away from the base design. Now, obviously, we don't need this great big hoop for this, so I'm going to right click and select the medium hoop. I'll change it to foot 44C. I want to make sure at start needle position is not checked. I'll click OK. And then I'm going to go to Design, Auto Start and End, set the start needle position at the first stitch and the end needle position at the last stitch, and go OK. So this is the design or the file that I will use to write to my card machine, and that I will stitch this design twice to create the 2 stitched StumpWork petals. There is really no need to save this separately because it is always part of the base design that you create. So you can X out of this and say yes to save the changes and close. I don't need to do this second petal because I can use this one file and it will be done in the same manner. However, I do want to choose my sheer fabric petal, and I'll go through the same process. First, I need to create this subdesign. Then I need to open the StumpWork subdesign. I'll go through and change it to the medium hoop. I want to make sure at start needle position is unchecked, and I'll change this to a 44C and click OK. Go to Design, Auto Start and End, place the start needle position at the first stitch, the end needle position at the last stitch, and click OK. This is now ready to write to your card or machine, And when I close out of this, I do want to save the changes and close. So both of these petals can be accessed from the original design. Now the CutWork is going to be a different story. So in this case, I am going to make a copy of this and paste it in a new file. So I'll select the cut, copy, go to new blank design, and paste it. Here, I want to do those same changes. I'll go to my hoop. I want 44C. I want to uncheck at start needle position and go OK. And then I'll go to design, auto start and end, place a dot at the first stitch of the design and the end needle position at the last stitch of the design and go OK. Now, because I want a stitch to happen before I do the cut, I'm going to go to the Edit toolbox and click on Outlines and Offsets. I want to uncheck Object Outlines, make sure that Offset Outlines is checked. I want an offset of 1 so that it's outside the border of the cut. I want 1 count and a single line, and I'll click OK. Now this is a stitch that is going to happen before I do the cut. So I need to take that stitch in color film and move it to start. I'll now select File, Save As, and I'm going to call this CutWork. I don't need to do that with this other petal because I can actually stack up my 2 pieces of fabric and cut them both at once. One other thing that we have to save separately is the PunchWork leaf. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to copy, open a new file, and paste. And this I can just save as is, and I'll call this PunchWork. That design then can be sent to the machine for stitching. Now, for my base design, all these flower petals, as well as the PunchWork leaf, will not be stitched in the base design. The only thing that will stitch in the base design will be my stem, my lettering, and my fringe flowers and the flower center. So what I'm going to do next is delete the parts that I want to delete. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and click on all these parts that I don't want to be part of the file, and I'll press delete. Looks like I didn't get a couple of them, so I can go back and select those. So I'll save this now as my base design. So the files that will be sent to the machine would be the 2 types of StumpWork petals, the PunchWork leaf, and then the cut petals. So we're now ready to return to the PowerPoint to see how this is all stitched out. One thing I did not mention, and this is in the handout, I like to print a pattern to cut any of the petals that I'm going to use with the fabric base. So this is done through Print Preview, and the directions are listed as far as what you need to isolate to print out the pattern. Think of this as applique. So with a cotton fabric or a batik, I want to pre-cut the fabric so that I can have a clean finish along the edge. because if I don't cut out the piece beforehand, after the satin stitches, I have to cut around the edge. So I'm going to have some raw edge extending. So in this case, I'll print a pattern piece so I can pre-cut the petals. And when you do this and you send the StumpWork design to the machine, because the ripple stitches first, you're going to bypass that first color by touching the down arrow key and then stitch just the stabilizing run on the agua mesh stabilizer. So this is going to serve as a placement line. I'll take that cut piece that I used to cut, or use the pattern to cut out. I'll place that over the placement line. And then on my machine, I'm going to go back to color 1. So I'll do the up arrow in this case to go back to the first color. And then I'll stitch all those stitches on my base fabric. Then I need to bypass color number 2 because there's no sense stitching another stabilizing run. So I then will stitch a double placement line. It's this double placement line that shows me where to place the wire that is going to be stitched over. So this line of stitching that you see on the stabilizer and this very first row of stitching, that's what I have to keep the wire in between. I will use my foot control and I'll decrease the sliding speed control so I can zigzag over the wire to hold it in place. And it sounds trickier than it is. It really, if you go slow and if you do happen to hit your needle on the wire is bendable. You may have to clean out a jam, but it really is quite simple to do. Just go slow until you get used to doing it. You'll stop whenever you need. And if you can see, I've got the wire bent around the shape and you can hold that in place because you're using the foot control and it will then slowly zigzag over the wire. And there's quite a bit of leeway you'll see in between the gauge of the wire and the zigzag stitch. When I come around to the end, I'm going to cross the wires and stitch over. And then when the machine stops, I will take wire cutters and clip close to the end of the wire. And then I'm ready to speed the machine back up, press the go button, and do the cover stitch as well as stabilizing run 2. Now, you can use the CutWork tool to cut, or you can trim with scissors. And for the 2 fabric StumpWork petals, I chose to trim with scissors. For the sheer fabric, I used 3 layers of sheer fabric, and I used different colors. I had a pink and a dark pink and a medium pink. I layered those fabrics over heavyweight tearaway. And I used heavyweight tearaway because I wanted to use the CutWork tool with this. So the stabilizing run stitches first, then the double placement line, and you can see this a little bit clearer, how much room is between those 2 lines. The zigzag stitch is going to come over the 2 placement lines. So for the tack down again, I'll use the foot control, slow down my speed, and then trim with the wire cutters, and the cover stitch is done next, and the stabilizing run. Then I'll set the machine for CutWork. I'll place the CutWork needle plate on. I'll remove the threads and the needles. I'll put the CutWork tool in position 1, and when the design stitches, it's going to tell me when to switch to position 2, 3, and 4. After it's cut out, I take it out of the hoop. I'll remove the stabilizer from the back of the petal. And with sheer fabric, you can use a soldering iron to kind of melt the edges. So any frizzies that occur from the raw edge, you can get rid of because you melt them away. So I don't use the placement line and cut out or pre-cut my sheer fabrics. I use the CutWork tool to create those. For the CutWork petals, I placed 2 layers of my fabric over heavyweight tearaway again, and the stabilizing run or the running before stitches first, and then set the machine for CutWork, run through cut 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then you can remove those petals from the hoop. For the PunchWork leaf, I think of PunchWork as being a lot like applique as well. A placement line is going to stitch first. I used a piece of felt to be the background, and I hooped this without stabilizer. Then I set the machine for PunchWork. I used the needle punch needle plate, the needle punch needles, and the needle punch foot. Now, with the needle punch attachment, you have 2 choices for needles. You have a long set and a short set that comes with the attachment. Normally, we're going to use the long needles. So that's what I use to needle punch the felt. You want to be sure and set your security on your machine. Choose the needles, the punch plate, and then of course the foot. And then you're going to lay fibers over the placement line, and you can use yarns. You can needle punch actually over through fabric. You can add roving, all sorts of things. And this that I used was actually a yarn that I unwound and placed those over the placement line. And then I punched, and I found that I needed more, so I added more. And if you do add more, you want to be sure and back up, and you'll do that on your machine. And then you just needle punch through it again. When you're done, you want to reset the machine. Your machine will need cleaning. It will also need oiling. And then reset it for embroidery. I used regular tension when I did this, and you'll see why in a minute. I want to not use embroidery tension because I want to balance tension so that the wrong side of the leaf blanket stitch looks just as nice as the top side. Normally when we needle punch, it's uglier on the top side. So this was the right side, this was the wrong side. And the wrong side creates a more subtle effect. And so I felt like I wanted to use the wrong side. And that's why I reset with regular tension. And then I just trimmed close to the stitching around the leaf. Then set the machine for couching. I used the Free Motion couching foot number 43. I used a heavyweight cutaway behind my background fabric, and I did leave the stabilizer in the fabric to give it some stability. And when the couching foot, when you start couching and the machine ties off at the beginning, be sure and stop the machine so you can cut the tail off as it goes around and does the spirals around. Next, you'll stitch the stem and the fringe flowers. And then the next step is to do puffy foam. Once the lettering is stitched, you can pull the foam away. And this was 2mm thickness foam. You don't want to use craft foam. You want to make sure you use an embroidery foam. Use tweezers to remove the small bits, and then you can use a steam iron or a hair dryer, and that melts kind of the remaining pieces. And so your lettering looks nicer that way. From the back side, you'll trim your fringe flowers from the underside, and I'm trimming them down through the bobbin area. If you want to trim along this edge, you can have a cut fringe. You want to trim along the bobbin area if you want looped fringe. And you'll use you can use like the purple thing, if you have one of those, to pull the fringe to the top side when you're done. Next, set the machine for sewing. used the open embroidery foot number 20D, and I used a straight stitch and I sewed along the edge of all the petals, and that was sewed to the background fabric. Then for the CutWork petals, I formed a pleat in those petals. I tacked them at the base, and then I folded and tacked along the rounded edge of the petal as well to give them more dimension. The StumpWork petals have wires, so you can bend and shape those. Those you don't need to tack down at both sides, just along the base. Then the PunchWork leaf, in order to attach that to the background, I did need to change my needle plate to the 9mm plate. I set it for a zigzag and then couched the yarn down the center, and that's what attached the PunchWork leaf to the project. For the flat fell binding, you'll cut your backing about 1 inch larger than the front on all sides, and do a straight stitch kind of to tack the top to the back side. I used needle position of -2, and I guided the etch in the foot along the cut edge of the front of the wall hanging, and you'll stitch all around, pivoting at the corners. And then I want to trim 3/4 of an inch from this edge to the edge of the binding. I wanted to leave myself a little bit of leeway. That's why I cut it at 1 inch, and then I could exactly trim it to 3/4 of an inch. Then put the 8mm lap seam foot number 71 on your machine. Set your needle position to -4, -5. Place the foot on top of your binding, and I folded in the edge here, done a double fold, and you'll stitch on top and sink your needle, and then bring the edge of the binding up over this part of the foot, and you're going to stitch to the end of the first edge of your binding. Notice how I've stopped here at the edge and I've back stitched, and then I'll take the piece out from under the foot. I'm going to trim the bulk, and then I fold a miter in and fold the edge in and clip it to hold it in place. Set the foot back on at the corner, again stitching for a few stitches, and then sink your needle, bring the binding edge over the top of the foot. And when you approach that final corner that has already been stitched, stop far enough in advance so that you can kind of pre-press the edge, eliminate the bulk, and then you just stitch to the end. And you're done with the project. So Julie, do I have questions?
Yes, thanks, Debbie. We have a few questions here. I'm going to go in order, starting with the beginning of the webinar. The first question is, when cloning the French flowers, why did you use the toolbar instead of right-clicking and moving the copy made?
Repeat that question, I didn't get it.
Sure. When you were cloning the French flowers, you used the toolbar. Can you just right-click and move a copy?
You can. A clone is a right-click and a drag. I could copy and I could paste, and then I'd have to move that copy away from the original. Either way makes a copy. It's just another way to make a copy. When you clone something, though, you're right-clicking and dragging, and when you drag, you can place that copy away from the first design or the design you cloned.
Okay, great. The next question, why did you use the ripple stitching to create the petal design? Would the outline have worked without any stitching inside it?
You bet.
Okay.
It was just to create texture. It was a design decision.
So it's more preference. And all right, when you were doing two petals with the same properties, can you use the feature copy properties?
There's really was no need to use copy properties there because are you talking about not when I was like creating the sub design, but when I was originally creating the petal?
Mm-hmm.
I have not tried that with StumpWork. I'd have to try it. I don't know that it wouldn't work, but if I created one StumpWork petal, I don't know if I could apply it. I'd have to test. And I really, to be quite honest, I've never tried copy properties for StumpWork.
Okay. And for the stump, here's another stump work question. When you did CutWork first and then stump work, could you, another way to do it, could you just go to the StumpWork toolbox and digitize?
Yes, that's another way to create StumpWork. The way I created it, I used that because I had created the ripple petal first. And so the best way to add StumpWork is to go to the to add StumpWork or create a border. You can digitize StumpWork from the get-go, but because I had created all 5 petals with the wreath tool, that's why I did it that way. And realize that there are lots of different ways to get the same end result, or at least a similar end result. I chose to do the add CutWork border because I had created the ripple petals first. But if you don't want the ripple petals and you only want to do StumpWork petals, then yes, by all means, just do digitize StumpWork, or digitize piece, I think is what it's called in the software.
Okay, sounds good. And we have one listener who would like to know how you activated the ruler when you were digitizing.
Oh,
Can you
it's
show
the M
that?
on the, yes, it's the M on the keyboard.
Okay. All right. Let me see.
And you can also access it through the view menu. View and measure is another way to activate it. But the M on the keyboard is a shortcut key. And that is part of the handout. I probably didn't say I'm pressing the M on the keyboard, but it is on the handout.
Okay. And we have one last question. What presser foot did you use when you were stitching the lettering with the Puffy Foam?
When I was stitching what, Julie?
The lettering with the Puffy Foam.
Oh, I had left the 43 foot on and the couching foot, and with it being a cupped foot, I felt that it did a good job of stitching the lettering.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Tomorrow, you will receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinar with a recording of this webinar. Also, in a couple days, the webinar and the handouts will be available on BERNINA.com. Just click on Learn and Create tab at the top right, then click on Classes and then Webinars. If you have other questions or we were not able to answer your questions today, please email me or Debbie. On behalf of BERNINA, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.